It was just past midnight when I pulled into that desolate gas station on Highway 16, the kind of place that seems to exist in a permanent state of twilight, even during the day. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unnatural blue glow across the empty parking lot. I hadn't seen another car for at least 40 minutes, and the isolation was starting to get to me. This wasn't how I'd planned my cross-country road trip, but a series of wrong turns and a stubborn refusal to use GPS had led me here, exhausted, low on fuel, and desperately in need of caffeine to keep me going for another hour until I reached the next town with a decent motel. I should probably back up a bit and explain how I ended up in this situation. My name's Alex, and 3 days ago, I quit my soul-crushing corporate job in Seattle, packed my Honda Civic with whatever would fit, and decided to drive across the country with no real destination in mind. Just freedom, the open road, and a chance to figure out what I actually wanted from life now that I'd hit 30 and realized I hadn't accomplished anything that truly mattered to me. It was impulsive, sure, but sometimes you need to break everything down to build something better. What I hadn't counted on was meeting Jamie earlier that day. I spotted him on the side of the road about 100 miles back, thumb out, backpack at his feet, and a cardboard sign that simply read, "Anywhere but here." Something about his easy smile and the way the wind tousled his dark curls made me pull over, despite all the warnings about never picking up hitchhikers. We clicked immediately, both of us running from something, both of us searching for something else, though neither of us could quite articulate what that something was. As I pulled up to the gas pump, Jamie was sleeping in the passenger seat, his head resting against the window, features softened in the dim light. I didn't want to wake him, so I quietly got out to fill the tank. That's when I noticed the attendant, a wiry man in his 60s with thick glasses and a name tag that read Earl. He was watching me from inside the small office with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, but I chalked it up to the late hour and the fact that we were probably his only customers in hours. "Evening," I called out as I approached the office to pay, trying to sound friendlier than I felt. "Just need to pay for pump 3. Earl nodded slowly, his eyes darting between me and my car where Jamie was now stirring awake. "Coming in from the city?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft for a man with such weathered features. "Yeah, heading east," I replied vaguely, sliding my credit card across the counter. "Long drive ahead. Might want to wait a bit," Earl said, glancing at the security monitor behind him. "Storm's coming in fast. Radio says it's a bad one." I hadn't noticed any signs of bad weather, but the sky out here was vast and unpredictable. As if on cue, a distant rumble of thunder punctuated his warning. Jamie appeared at the door, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his presence somehow making the small office feel even smaller. "Hey," he said, nodding at Earl before turning to me. "Everything okay?" Before I could answer, the lights flickered once, twice, and then with a definitive buzz, went completely out. The sudden darkness was absolute, the kind that makes you forget what it was like to see at all. I heard Jamie's sharp intake of breath beside me, felt him move closer until our shoulders touched. "Don't move." Earl's voice came from somewhere in front of us, strangely calm. "Power goes out here all the time. Backup generator should kick in any second." But it didn't. Instead, I heard Earl moving around, the scratch of a match, and then a small flame illuminated his face from below as he lit an old hurricane lamp. The warm glow created more shadows than light, transforming the ordinary office into something from another time. "Generators probably flooded again," Earl sighed, adjusting the lamp's flame. "Happens every time it rains hard up in the mountains. Water table rises, gets into the shed." He looked at us both, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "You two better come into the back office. Not safe out front with no lights." Jamie and I exchanged glances. There was something off about the situation, but with the storm now clearly audible outside and the darkness pressing in, we didn't have many options. Earl led us through a door behind the counter into a small room that served as both office and storage. It was cluttered but clean, with a desk, filing cabinet, and a small couch that had seen better days. The walls were covered with faded maps and newspaper clippings. Earl set the lamp on the desk and then did something that made my heart skip. He closed the door behind us and turned a key in the lock. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep the alarm out of my voice. "Standard procedure," Earl said matter-of-factly. "Power outage means security systems are down." Can't have the store open to anyone who might come by. Company policy. But we're not just anyone, Jamie protested. We're customers. Earl shrugged. Same difference in the dark. Look, we just need to wait for the all clear from dispatch. They'll call when the power's back on the grid. Shouldn't be more than an hour or two. An hour or two? I repeated incredulously. We can't stay here that long. We need to get back on the road. Not much road to get back on if you can't see it, Earl pointed out. Highway gets tricky in these conditions. No streetlights for the next 40 miles. Trust me, you're better off waiting. I wanted to argue, but the crash of thunder directly overhead made his point for him. Jamie touched my arm gently, a silent suggestion to let it go. I took a deep breath and nodded reluctantly. Fine, but as soon as the power's back, we're leaving. Earl nodded, seemingly satisfied. Make yourselves comfortable. I need to check something outside. Don't open this door for anyone but me, understand? Without waiting for a response, he unlocked the door, slipped out, and locked it again from the outside. And just like that, Jamie and I were alone, locked in a stranger's office in the middle of nowhere, with only a hurricane lamp between us and complete darkness. Well, Jamie said after a moment of stunned silence, this is definitely not how I expected this day to end. His attempt at humor broke some of the tension, and I found myself laughing despite the situation. I'm sorry I got you into this, I said, sinking onto the couch. I should have just stuck to the main highways. Jamie sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his leg against mine. Are you kidding? This is the most interesting thing that's happened to me in months. Besides, it's not like you planned for a power outage and a creepy gas station attendant to lock us in his office. True, but still. I trailed off, suddenly aware of how intimate the space felt with just the two of us and the soft glow of the lamp. We'd spent the day talking easily in the car, but something about this forced proximity made me acutely conscious of every movement, every breath. So, Jamie said, filling the silence, since it looks like we're going to be here for a while, tell me something you haven't told me yet. Something you don't usually tell strangers. I raised an eyebrow. Aren't we past the stranger stage by now? I mean, we're literally locked in a room together. Fair point. He conceded with a smile that made the lamplight catch in his eyes. But there's still so much I don't know about you. Like why you really decided to quit your job and drive across the country with no plan. I hesitated. The truth wasn't something I'd fully admitted even to myself, let alone someone I'd just met. But there was something about Jamie that made me want to be honest. I was engaged, I said finally, staring at the flame rather than meeting his eyes. To someone I'd been with for 6 years. We had it all planned out, the wedding, the house in the suburbs, the whole future mapped to the last detail. And then 3 months ago, I found out he'd been cheating on me with his coworker for over a year. Alex, I'm so sorry, Jamie said softly. I shook my head. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing that I wasn't as devastated as I should have been. That maybe a part of me was actually relieved to have an excuse to blow up the life I'd been building because it never really felt like mine. Like I'd been following someone else's blueprint for happiness. I looked up at him then. So I ended it. Kept working for a while to save up money. And then one day, I just couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't pretend I knew what I was doing or where I was going. So I left. Jamie was quiet for a moment, his eyes never leaving mine. That takes a lot of courage, he said finally. Most people never break out of the lives they think they're supposed to have, even when they're miserable. What about you? I asked, eager to shift the focus. What are you running from? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Who says I'm running from anything? Maybe I'm running towards something. Are you? I don't know yet, he admitted. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew exactly who I was supposed to be before I even figured it out myself. The pastor's son, straight-A student, future doctor or lawyer or whatever respectable profession would make my parents proud. Except I'm not that person. Never was. Who are you then? I asked, genuinely curious. Still working that out, he said with a small laugh. But I know I'm someone who wants to see the world beyond county lines. Someone who wants to create things. Art, music, experiences, not just consume what others have made. Someone who, he paused, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Someone who believes in connections that happen when you least expect them. The air between us seemed to thicken, charged with something neither of us had acknowledged directly during our day of easy conversation and shared music in the car. I wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly we were closer, the distance between us on the couch shrinking until our shoulders touched, then our hands. It's strange, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. How sometimes you can feel like you've known someone for years when it's only been hours. Jamie's fingers intertwined with mine, his touch sending a current through my skin that had nothing to do with the electricity we were waiting to return. Maybe some connections don't need time, he suggested. Maybe they just need the right moment. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the small window high on the wall, but inside our locked sanctuary, a different kind of storm was brewing. One made of shared confidences and tentative touches, and the kind of honest conversation that only seems possible in unusual circumstances. We talked for what felt like hours, moving from our pasts to our dreams, from favorite books to worst fears, from childhood memories to future hopes. With each revelation, the space between us grew smaller, our bodies gradually shifting until we were facing each other, knees touching, hands occasionally brushing as we gestured to emphasize a point or reached for the water bottles Earl had left us before disappearing. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jamie said after a comfortable lull in conversation. "At this point, I think we're well past the personal boundary," I laughed. "But go ahead. When did you know? That you were gay, I mean." His question was direct but gentle, his eyes curious without being intrusive. I considered this for a moment. I think I always knew on some level, but I didn't have the language for it until high school. Even then, I tried to convince myself it was just a phase because that's what everyone around me wanted to believe. It wasn't until college that I finally accepted it wasn't going to change and stopped apologizing for who I am. I looked at him curiously. "What about you?" "7th grade," he said without hesitation. "Science class. We were dissecting frogs, and I was more interested in watching Jason Matthews concentrate than I was in the actual dissection. His tongue would stick out a little when he was focused, and I couldn't stop staring." He smiled at the memory. "Of course, it took another 5 years before I told anyone, and another 2 before I told my parents." "How did they take it?" I asked, knowing from his earlier comments that his family was religious. "About as well as you'd expect from a Southern Baptist minister and his wife," Jamie sighed. "They didn't kick me out or anything that dramatic, but things were never the same. There was always this unspoken hope that I'd find my way back to the Lord's path. That's partly why I left. I got tired of being someone's failed salvation project." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," he acknowledged, "but it also taught me something important about authenticity, about how living a lie might seem easier in the moment, but it hollows you out over time until there's nothing left that feels real." His eyes met mine, searching. "Is that what happened with your engagement? Did it start feeling like a lie?" The question hit closer to home than I was comfortable admitting. But there was something about the moment, the storm outside, the warm glow of the lamp, the strange liminal space we found ourselves in, that made honesty feel not just possible but necessary. "Yes," I said finally. "I loved him, or at least I thought I did. But looking back, I think I was more in love with the idea of stability, of having all the boxes checked. He was safe, familiar. The betrayal hurt. But what hurt more was realizing I'd been betraying myself all along by settling for something that never quite fit." Jamie nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes the hardest person to be honest with is yourself." A particularly loud crack of thunder made us both jump, and suddenly the small space seemed even more intimate, our faces illuminated only by the flickering lamp as the storm intensified outside. I became acutely aware of how close we were sitting, of the warmth of his hand still in mine, of the way his eyes kept dropping to my lips when he thought I wasn't noticing. "I keep wondering," I said softly, "what the odds are of this happening. Of all the highways in all the states, somehow we ended up here, in this moment." "Pretty astronomical," Jamie agreed, his voice equally quiet. "But I'm glad we did." There was a question in his eyes, a hesitation that mirrored my own. We'd known each other for less than 24 hours. Yet something was happening between us that couldn't be explained by logic or reason. It was the kind of connection that romance novels are built on, immediate, intense, and completely unexpected. "Jamie," I started, not entirely sure what I was going to say next, but needing to acknowledge the tension that had been building between us all day. Before I could continue, A loud thump from somewhere outside the office made us both freeze. We'd been so absorbed in our conversation that we'd almost forgotten where we were, locked in a gas station office during a power outage by a stranger who had disappeared over an hour ago. "What was that?" Jamie whispered, his hand tightening around mine. "Probably just Earl moving something around," I suggested, though I wasn't convinced. He did say he needed to check on something. Another thump, followed by what sounded like scraping, made us both stand up. The hurricane lamp cast long shadows across the walls, transforming the cozy space into something more sinister. "I don't like this," Jamie said, moving toward the door. "We should try to get out of here." I followed him, suddenly aware of how vulnerable we were. "The door's locked from the outside, remember?" Jamie examined the lock, then looked around the room. "There has to be another key somewhere. Help me look." We began searching the office, careful not to disturb things too obviously in case Earl returned. The filing cabinet was locked, the desk drawers contained nothing but paperwork and office supplies, and the shelves were filled with inventory logs and employee manuals. "Look at this," Jamie said suddenly, holding up a newspaper clipping he'd found pinned to a corkboard behind the desk. The headline read, "Local Man Missing After Storm," and the article detailed the disappearance of a traveler who had last been seen at this very gas station during a power outage 3 years ago. "That could be a coincidence," I said, trying to stay calm despite the chill that ran down my spine. "People go missing all the time." "Maybe," Jamie conceded, "but look at these." He pointed to other clippings partially hidden behind maps and schedules, more stories of disappearances, all within a 50-mile radius of where we stood, all during storms or power outages. My heart was pounding now. "We need to get out of here. Now." Just then, the scraping sound came again, closer this time, followed by slow, heavy footsteps approaching the office door. Jamie and I backed away, instinctively moving toward the far corner of the room. "What if it's not Earl?" Jamie whispered. "What if someone else is out there? Or what if it is Earl and he's—" I couldn't finish the thought. It seemed absurd, like something from a horror movie, and yet the newspaper clippings and our current situation made it feel terrifyingly plausible. The footsteps stopped outside the door. We held our breath, watching as the handle turned slowly, then stopped, still locked. A key rattled in the lock, and we exchanged panicked glances, silently communicating the same thought. We needed a weapon, something to defend ourselves with. Jamie grabbed a heavy stapler from the desk, while I picked up a letter opener that had been hidden under some papers. They weren't much, but they were better than nothing. The lock clicked, and the door swung open to reveal Earl, soaking wet and looking exhausted. He seemed surprised to find us standing there, clearly ready to attack. "Whoa, easy there," he said, raising his hands. "Just me. Got the generator running finally, but it's only powering the essential systems. Lights should be back on in the main store, but the pumps are still down." I lowered the letter opener slightly, but didn't put it down. "What's with all these?" I asked, gesturing to the newspaper clippings with my free hand. Earl followed my gaze and sighed. "Research. I've been tracking unusual occurrences in the area. Bit of a hobby of mine." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, but not locking it this time. "I know it looks strange, but I'm not the one you need to worry about tonight." "What's that supposed to mean?" Jamie asked, still gripping the stapler. Earl moved to the desk and picked up an old CB radio I hadn't noticed before. He turned a dial, and static filled the room before a voice broke through. A police dispatcher reporting multiple accidents on the highway due to the storm and warning about a potentially dangerous suspect who had escaped from a transport vehicle when it crashed about 10 miles from our location. "That's why I locked you in," Earl explained, turning down the volume. "Standard procedure during power outages, yes, but especially when there's someone dangerous in the area. I was trying to protect you." The tension in my shoulders eased slightly, but I wasn't entirely convinced. "Why didn't you just tell us that? Would you have believed me?" Earl countered. "Two strangers pull into my station in the middle of the night, and I start talking about escaped prisoners? You'd have thought I was trying to scare you into staying so I could rob you, or worse." He had a point. "What about the missing persons?" Jamie asked, nodding toward the clippings. Earl's expression darkened. "My son was one of them. 5 years ago. They never found him. That's why I track these things, looking for patterns, for anything that might explain what happened to him." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, raw despite the years that had passed. I felt a wave of shame for having suspected him of something sinister. "I'm sorry," I said, finally setting down the letter opener. "We didn't know." Earl nodded, accepting the apology without comment. "The power company says the main lines should be restored within the hour. You're welcome to wait in here where it's safe, or if you're determined to leave, I can't stop you. But I wouldn't recommend driving in this weather, especially with someone dangerous out there." Jamie and I exchanged looks, silently weighing our options. The storm was still raging outside, and the idea of encountering an escaped prisoner on a dark, deserted highway wasn't appealing. "We'll wait," I decided, and Jamie nodded in agreement. Earl seemed relieved. "Good. I need to go back out to check on the generator again. Feel free to use the radio if you need anything." He paused at the door. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you two found each other. Doesn't happen often enough in this world, people connecting like that." Before we could respond, he was gone, leaving the door unlocked behind him. Jamie and I stood in stunned silence for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. "Well," Jamie said finally, a small smile breaking through his serious expression, "that was not where I thought this night was going." I couldn't help but laugh, the tension of the past few minutes dissolving into relief. "No kidding. I think we just lived through the first act of a horror movie and somehow made it out alive. And the night's still young," Jamie pointed out, setting the stapler back on the desk and moving closer to me. "Where were we before we were so rudely interrupted by our imaginations running wild?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility. The fear and adrenaline of the past few minutes had somehow cleared away any remaining hesitation, leaving only the undeniable pull between us. "I think," I said slowly, stepping toward him until we were just inches apart. "We were about to do something either very brave or very foolish." "Is there really a difference?" Jamie asked, his hand coming up to rest lightly on my waist. "The best moments in life usually qualify as both." I couldn't argue with that logic, especially not with him looking at me the way he was, like I was something precious and unexpected, a gift he hadn't dared hope for. So instead of answering with words, I closed the remaining distance between us and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a gentle press of lips that asked rather than demanded, but when Jamie responded, pulling me closer and deepening the kiss, any remaining uncertainty vanished. This was right. This was exactly where I was supposed to be, even if it was in a locked gas station office during a power outage in the middle of nowhere. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, the look of wonder on Jamie's face mirrored what I was feeling. That something significant had just happened, something that couldn't be explained by logic or reason, but felt more real than anything had in a long time. "I've been wanting to do that since you picked me up this morning," Jamie admitted, his hand still on my waist, thumb tracing small circles that sent shivers up my spine. "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious. He smiled. "Because some things are worth waiting for. And because I wasn't sure if you felt it too until we got locked in here and had nothing to do but talk." "I felt it," I assured him, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. "I just didn't know what to do about it. It's not every day you pick up a hitchhiker who turns out to be." I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence without sounding overly sentimental. "Who turns out to be what?" Jamie prompted, his eyes searching mine. "Someone who makes you question everything you thought you knew about chance and timing and connections," I finished honestly. "Someone who makes you wonder if maybe there's more to this universe than random coincidence." Jamie's smile widened. "That's quite a compliment." "It's quite a feeling," I countered. We might have kissed again. In fact, we were definitely about to, when a sudden humming sound filled the room, and then, with a flicker and a buzz, the overhead lights came on, harsh and fluorescent after the warm glow of the hurricane lamp. "Power's back," Jamie stated unnecessarily, blinking in the sudden brightness. "So it is," I agreed, feeling strangely disappointed despite having waited hours for this very moment. With the return of electricity came the return of reality. The road trip, the separate lives we were leading, the fact that tomorrow we would reach the junction where Jamie had originally planned to head south, while I continued east. As if reading my thoughts, Jamie took my hand. "Just because the power's back doesn't mean anything has to change," he said softly. "Not if we don't want it to." Before I could respond, Earl returned, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Looks like we're back in business," he announced. "Roads should be clearing up soon too." Storm's moving east pretty quickly. Thank you, I said sincerely. For everything, including locking us in for our own safety. Earl chuckled. Not the worst place to be stuck during a storm, I suppose. Especially in good company. He gave us a knowing look that suggested he'd noticed the shift in our dynamic. You two heading out now or waiting a bit longer for the roads to dry? I looked at Jamie, the question in my eyes extending beyond just our immediate plans. He squeezed my hand, a silent answer that made my heart race. I think we'll wait a little longer, Jamie told Earl, his eyes never leaving mine. We're in no rush. Earl nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Take all the time you need. Coffee's on the house when you're ready to hit the road. As Earl busied himself with resetting the store systems, Jamie and I moved back to the couch, still holding hands, both aware that something had fundamentally changed in the hours we'd spent locked in this small office. So, Jamie said, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of my hand, about that junction tomorrow. What about it? I asked, though I knew exactly what he was referring to. I was thinking maybe I could head east for a while instead of south, he suggested, his casual tone belied by the intensity in his eyes. If that's okay with you. The relief that flooded through me was immediate and overwhelming. I think that could be arranged, I said, trying to match his casual tone and failing miserably. East is nice this time of year, I hear. It's not the direction that matters, Jamie said, suddenly serious. It's the company. And there, in a gas station office that had been transformed from a place of fear to a place of possibility, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected detours lead exactly where you need to go. We still had a long road ahead, literally and figuratively, and no guarantees about where this connection might lead, but for the first time in months, I was excited about the journey. When we finally left the gas station an hour later, the storm had cleared, leaving behind a sky full of stars and roads that stretched endlessly before us. Earl waved from the doorway as we pulled away, two strangers who had arrived separately but were leaving together, forever changed by a power outage, a locked door, and the courage to acknowledge a connection that defied explanation. As we drove east into the night, Jamie's hand found mine across the center console, and I couldn't help but think that sometimes it takes getting lost to find exactly where you're supposed to be. Total _char_count, 18,473.